Welcome, everyone. But just before I begin, ma'am, I know you're very strict on time. We started 5 minutes late. We, we, st- we can take 5 minutes. Okay. This is a big panel, as you can see. Okay. And there's a lot to talk about. So, first of all, on behalf of the Bangalore Lit Fest, let me and all the panelists welcome you. I understand this is the first session of the Lit Fest, and I can't think of a better topic with which to begin this wonderful literature festival, which is, stories from everywhere. A city like Bangalore has acted as a magnet to people from everywhere. So I in fact call Bangalore like the equivalent of the New York of India. It attracts everyone, and everyone comes there, finds their own stories here, but also brings with them the stories that they've carried back from their homelands, wherever they may be. And today's panel, a very distinguished panel of writers. We have Kalpana, who's from Kashmir but works in New York. Shyamala, who's from Telangana. We have Paramita Satpathy from Orissa and Delhi. We have Linthoi, who's from Manipur but works in Mysore, and Anushka, who's from Bombay but grew up in, but studied in the United States. So it's a real melting pot of places, people, cultural influences, and I think they bring back all of that into their writings. This particular session is focused around their collections of short stories, although many people here have written in various other forms, whether it's novels, novellas, poems, etc., screenplays. But this session is based on some of their short stories. And to use that oft used cliche, when they say brevity is the soul of wit, I mean, the guy who wrote it, of course, went on to write extremely long plays, but brevity is indeed the soul of wit. And if you look at a short story, it's been described as a love affair, whereas a novel can be a marriage. Now, depending on which side of the spectrum you are, your tastes might move to one or the other. But be that as it may, there is in the short story a very extraordinary ability to capture whole worlds, whole lives, and do it with an economy and brevity that can be very powerful and that can really stay with you long. And therefore, it's been part of the whole, canon of literature from the ancient ages, whether it is Aesop's fables or the Jataka and the Panchatantra tales, down to Chaucer, to Tagore, to Sunil Ganguly, R.K. Narayan. I mean, the list is very long, to more recent writers like Jhumpa Lahiri, Alice Munro, and Chinamanda Adichie. However, from what little I know of the publishing world, publishers often are reluctant to take on short stories as a genre. They have their reasons. They say all stories are not consistent in quality. Some of the stories lack, thematic unities, and so on and so forth. So, but these people have been, I think, courageous and bold in going against the tide and not going for the novel form, but going for the short story form, which is not so market friendly. And I think we owe them a debt of gratitude for doing that. And they've also done it by bringing us voices of people from very distant places across very diverse landscapes. And with that, I'd like to jump right into what you've done with the short story format, each of you. So Kalpana, maybe I'll begin with you. Kalpana has recently completed Labor of Love, 3 years, you said, of a translation of Hari Krishna Kaul's stories, For Now It Is Night, which talks about the lives of the Kashmiri Pandits. And Hari Krishna Kaul was one of the major playwrights and writers of that era. I'm not sure, though, how many people here are familiar with him and his writings. You're also his niece, and so you've seen the writer in a very personal capacity. So just to start things off, what can you tell us a little bit about Hari Krishna Kaul, his stories, why and how you decided to choose this as your work of translation?
Is it on now? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, Hari Krishnan Kaul was my uncle. He passed away in 2009. And I'm aware when I come to these sessions now that not only am I translating from Kashmiri, I'm also translating Kashmir. Certainly, even for the rest of this country and certainly internationally, because the book will have a US publication in 2024. So Kaul was born in Srinagar, and he lived most of his life in Srinagar until 1989-90, with the well-documented exodus of Hindus from Srinagar. So he, what did he write about? I should also mention that he won the Sahitya Academy Award for Kashmiri in 2000. And in addition to 4 volumes of short stories, from which this is just a mere selection, he was a very well-known dramatist and playwright. And he also wrote a novel in Hindi after migration when he lived in Delhi called Vyat Vyatha. So what did Kaul write about, and why do I think it's important that his work get translated and disseminated? Kaul lived in downtown, on what's now known as Old Town Srinagar, which is really a very densely populated part of the city. 1 square mile, if you can imagine that. And all his characters, all his themes, particularly in the beginning, the first half of his writings come out of that 1 square mile. So these are characters that anyone would encounter on the streets. But he gives a very different life to them. So when you start reading the stories, which I hope you all will, you'll realize that these are stories specific to Kashmir, because he did not write for the rest of the world. He was only interested in Kashmir. He wrote for Kashmiris. But these are everyman's stories. They're stories of abandonment. They're stories of alienation. They're stories of dysfunctional relationships. There are even stories of repressed female sexuality, which was quite daring of him in the 70s. There are also hints of homosexuality, all of which shows that despite the calm and smooth veneer of these stories, there's a transgressive writer writing about things that are important to him and that are important to modern readers. He wrote about these things in various ways, but because this is Kashmir, the politics is never far from the surface. He was not an overtly political writer, but the politics of the state simmers under the veneer of these stories. And he talks about the fault lines in clear-cut terms. He doesn't gloss over them, but he talks about it with empathy, with humor, with sarcasm even, but never demonizing the other and never making a victim of himself and his community. So as you know, there are 2 communities that inhabit this landscape, and that's what he talks about, how the accommodations are made between these 2 communities, how people who can share a common language and a landscape but are divided by religion can negotiate this landscape so that they can work and live together. These are Kaul's themes, and of course they change after 1989. He writes more about exile and migration, but his narrative techniques also change.
So just on this particular point, you talk about exile, migration and abandonment. I just found one of the lines in one of the characters in your story is very interesting. So this is about a character called Pyari. And Pyari at the beginning of one of Kaul's stories is shown to have given up eating mutton because she felt revulsion and disgust at the very image of animal slaughter. And by the end of the story, she takes a very different position. And she says that having one's throat slit, Pyari says, is better than being abandoned. Is there a sense of the Kashmiri Pandit being abandoned? And does that come through in present day writing or in Kaul's writing? And I know it's a big loaded question, but you will have to give us the essence of that in about a couple of minutes.
The short answer is yes, but the simple answer is it's not just the abandonment of the Kashmiri Pandits, it's also familiar abandonment, sons leaving home, husbands being absent. So it's abandonment on several levels. But more than abandonment, I think what comes through in this story too, and in other stories, is the sense of entrapment that Kashmiri Pandits feel and have felt. And that's conveyed in a variety of ways. The only thing I would like to touch upon is how the narrative techniques change. From realism, he was a big fan of Chekhov and Chekhov's writings. But as things became more extraordinary in Kashmir, he realized that narrative realism and the language of realism was failing him as a writer. And he started using more myth and symbolism and allegory because that was the only way he could sort of create meaning and put some structure around the increasing chaos of his life and other people's lives. And I just don't want to make it about Kashmiri Pandits because Kashmiri Muslims had similar trials that they were facing through all of this.
Sure. I think you mentioned myth and maybe you to reflect upon modern times, and Linthoi, I think, I'm not sure, but does something around, no, but you're not on turn now, but we will come to you. But just keep in mind, but there is all these diverse voices, but there are so many ways that they are not, that they also display commonalities and common spaces. I'd like to move on to, I'm sorry if this seems a little rushed, but time is really short. Like to move on to Gogula Shyamala. So her debut collection of short stories, Father May Be an Elephant and Mother Only a Small Basket, which is a wonderful title, I think, in the first place. Very intriguing. And she explores caste, tradition, exploitation in modern India. I think unusually for many of the writers that we have in urban literary fests like Bangalore, Shyamala is a first-generation learner. She's the first person from a family to receive an education, and she comes from a background of agricultural laborers. She's also an activist, a writer activist, and to that extent, I think the words that you write about caste politics, the valuelessness given to manual labor. Just things like getting a bucket of water in your house, gender politics, all of those things are seen through very different lenses, but also lenses that have a literary quality in them and not just an activist quality in them. So I think we'd be very interested to hear about the world that you have experienced, the world that you write about, and how you wear these hats of activist and writer together, how one feeds into the other, strengthens or weakens the other. So I invite you to talk a little about that.
Thank you for your rich questions. Yeah, actually I started writing in late my 40s. These stories, that is also, it shows my understanding, maturity of politics, maturity of Indian society, and from my place means my village. Actually, literature is started from my family, my father, my community, because Dalit community is a spring for music and literature. It's my opinion. So my father is great musician, and multiple music instruments he used to play in bazaar bands and temple tablas and church tablas and harmoniums. He expert all of these music instruments. So I grown up with this music, and when I my childhood, I listened my mother, grandmother's songs in the fields when planting paddy and harvesting, all that. But I never thought I am a writer. Just my life is like that. But when my father desire is to my education, given me education. I entered a school and intermediate and college and university. My village to Hyderabad. 300 kilometers far from my village. My village is near border between Karnataka and Telangana. Before Andhra Pradesh, before Telangana, we are Andhra Pradesh. Some language and some terms also in Kannada in my place. We call it Appa for my father. It is Kannada influence. So my perception grown up with my life through education and lifestyles and rituals in my community and rituals for out of community, other non-Dalit communities, variations and traditions. These are all emerged, they helped my perception. And also main thing is, we have so many movements in my state. Anti-feudal movement and anti-caste movements we have. That culture and the kind of literature emerge from the movements. Marxist movement and Dalit movement and feminist movement. All from this, I emerged my perception. So, in this time, I got great opportunity to think, to sit and think and write from my friends, feminist friends, Anveshi, Research Center for Women's Studies. They given me great opportunity to read and write. So I did one Dalit women project. I collected 55 Dalit women writings from 1920 to 2003. In this period, I collected across two states, Telangana and Andhra. I compiled as an editor. So in part of that, I wrote stories.
Shyamala, if I could just come in a little bit, because again, I'm running on time, but there is something that I wanted to read out to the audience
Yes.
because it struck me as so powerful. So in one of the stories, I think you write about one of the Dalit castes, I think it is the Chindu caste, and they are roving itinerant performers. So one of the characters, Elama, who is, I think, performing in this troupe, says, I think some people have criticized them after a bad show. And she says, the best way for us to attract them is with our performance, to make it so riveting that they sit and watch for hours. That is the most fitting reply to those who try and ride rough over us. Is this something that you are writing not only through the voice of your character, but for all the Dalit literature that might be wanting to find a voice but finds itself suppressed by mainstream publications, mainstream media, and not given enough support, is that you make it so good that they can't ignore you? Is that something that drives you? Like the way it drives Elama?
Yeah. I mentioned before, Dalit community is a spring for literature and art forms. But it is still today, and Ellamma and other legends of artists, they suffered with untouchability. they and also the art forms and their feelings, their profession. This is some painful situation. These Dalits also never feel like victims. These art forms also, they feel themselves, artists, they feel themselves very great and pride. But all society, uh, their mind filled with the full of caste ideology. So that's why untouchability is always hunting their art forms and their lives. Elama is not like me educated. She is a pure artist. She shows her anger and her resilience and her questions through her art forms in my area. I realized, I got to know these politics and these inner feelings of her through her biography. So I wrote this story because of her, after reading her biography.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you. I think what you've written and what you go through is very unique for many of us urban creatures. So thank you for opening that world to us in this very short time, and I hope we'll know more through the books that you write. Shifting gears a little bit or maybe completely, Anushka, coming to you. You have a background in screenplay writing and film, but you've also won a prestigious awards in short stories, and your short story collection, Principles of Prediction, has an amazing width of characters and situations. So, for example, there is a weather forecaster who tries to maintain her sanity while a storm is raging around her. She has to report, but she's also might be swept away by the storm. In Circus, one of your stories, there is Rajan, the lion tamer, who I think you've described as the perfect man, and his lover. And then in another story, Elephant Maximus, you have the unforgettable Kasata as in the role of the elephant kidnapper and the catnapper. So it's a very different world from the sort of harsh realities of, or maybe there is something there, from the harsh realities of the worlds of the Dalits or the Kashmiri Pandits. It's a different type of genre. But you have these fantasy elements occurring in them. So how do you choose these themes? How do you choose these ideas for crafting your short stories? And why?
The stories in my collection, Principles of Prediction, they were written, I mean, probably over the course of a decade. So one of the first short stories I wrote was, it was actually historical fiction. It's called Radio Story, and I must have started writing it back in 2010. But that actually, it came out of a family story. So just growing up hearing my grandmother talking about her father, who he was a ham radio operator, during the independence struggle. And so she was a child back then, so she had this other perspective on what had gone on, seeing the things that her father went through. And she would tell me about that. And then because she was talking about her childhood memories, but then there was also the historical aspect, which I, did some research on and read up on. And then sort of, I think, blending those things, which is a sort of emotional impact that you feel of these family stories, and then what you actually, like what you read about, which is more like factual and objective. And then I felt like maybe it just almost poured out of me in a fictional form. I think it gives you a certain openness to explore. I probably didn't feel like I could do justice to writing it as narrative nonfiction. So I think that's what fiction allowed me. And then from there, I mean, each story I think probably has its root somewhere. So
Where did the circus come from?
circus, I don't know why, but
Circuses aren't to be seen much these days. I mean,
yeah,
I remember seeing them in my youth, but
yeah.
yeah.
I don't know why I was just looking at archival documents where, images of old circuses, and there was something very evocative about it. And I think I used, so some of the um, circus animals that I talk about. I mean, of course, there's also the aspect of cruelty towards them, which was, I think, part of what I was wondering about when I wrote that story, because of how they're treated. And but I mean, the names of those creatures for some reason were very evocative to me. I don't know. It was. I think there's a sort of poetic element also when something just captures your interest and you don't know why.
No influences of Enid Blyton's Mr. Galliano's circus.
Oh, I don't know.
This is way past your time. You're way beyond your time. Okay, you chose this collection of short stories as your first book, right? As your debut novel, and I know that a lot of people who come to Bangalore Lit Fest are aspiring writers, and you very often hear from publishers, we are not interested in short stories, but you took that choice. Not only did you take that choice, and sometimes they say that, well, it can be short stories, but it needs to have a common set of characters in it, right? So Sherlock Holmes will work and Lupin will work. It's the same set of characters in different stories. But yours are like, very diverse. Was there an attempt for you to create some sort of thematic unity across these stories, and how did you find it, or you just didn't care?
No, that was definitely something I was I was thinking about. I mean, how do these stories link together, or will I just end up with a very sort of disparate set of stories? And I mean, it took me time, but I realized not to sort of force that shape upon a thing that I'm writing. And like eventually, I mean, I had someone say to me that, the common link is that you wrote all of them. So I think whenever we write, there's something that's, in the story which is so unconscious that we don't realize it until we read it later.
Very quick response to this, the theme being stories from everywhere, which I think the geography, the space-time is very important for, I think, all the other writers here, Kashmir, Telangana, Manipur, Orissa. In your case, is there an equally strong role that Bombay or the places that you've grown up in plays? Is the city or the space a major character?
So actually in Elephant Maximus, the story about the elephant kidnapper, I mean, it's located in Bombay's Chor Bazaar. So in that sense, there are locations which are mostly in Bombay. But I think the influence of a place can sometimes just be more about what you know, like having grown up in a place. So I'm sure, like, city life, it has an impact where you end up writing a lot of characters because you're surrounded by so much and so many people.
Thank you so much. I mean, sort of halfway through the mark, we're not doing too badly on time. Organizers, please note. I'd like to come over to Paramita, Satpathy. Please take a good look at her. Everybody who is a salaried employee or runs a business, she might be the most important person that you are meeting here today. She works in the Indian Revenue Service and is the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax in New Delhi. And I think coming from the world of taxation, accounting, and that sort of thing, the life in bureaucracy, I was personally interested in know how you sort of combine that with this world of literature and imagination. Does it help or harm you in any way? Are the two related in any way, or you have a sort of Chinese wall between the two?
Good question, Nilanjan. You people have clapped, thank you. But I have been more known as a writer because before coming into the service which gives me bread and butter, because I'm a regional writer, I write in Odia. So you can imagine that I need something to eat also. So much before that, I have started writing. And I believe that I live two lives. One life is for the world to, earn my bread and butter and be sincere to that. Believe that a writer is sincere everywhere. And I have wanted to be sincere to words and feelings also. And that is the life I live separately. And how I wish I live in that life altogether and all the time. But it's not happening. And that is why probably my love for that life is much more. And I actually grew up in a writer's family. My parents are writers. My mother is a very important poet of the country. And so that is why much before coming to any kind of job, I had grown up with books, writers, and kind of words and pages and history of literature kind of thing. Yes, since I have been writing for 35 years now, around 25 books have been published in my name, though in Odia I have 8 short story collections, 3 novels and 1 poetry collection, and few of them have been translated into English, Hindi and other languages. As Linthoi has said, talked about the love affair. Yes, stories have been very dear to my heart because, I want to be in love affairs all the time, perpetually, one after the other. So I have written around 200 stories of various themes. A lot of, because I always believe that story gives me a bigger canvas, to jump from one feeling to another, to capture one feeling, and then some kind of I can also try and experiment in that, in some kind of language and flow, and then go back to something else. Okay, maybe after writing so many stories, this has become a cleanse with me to keep on writing stories. Some of the major stories that I'll just describe because Nilanjan said whether I have written something thematically. Well, there is this book, Prapti, a collection of 10 short stories, been translated into English as Boundless Moment and to many languages because this book got Sahitya Academy Award in 2016. So thank you again. So it's been translated to many languages and Hindi and English because I can read those, so I believe that the translations are good. So here is thematic in the sense, this is regarding journeys of 10 women in 10 different stature, 10 different strata and 10 different lives. There is a woman who is a queen, but what is she longing for? And there is a girl of 10 years who is grown up in a slum and her experiences. And there is this, there is a woman who is in love, in a platonic love all through her life and how she sustains it. So many. I'm not narrating them one by one. So another thematic thing that I'm writing now is, many writings have been done the mythology and mythological women. But here I try to depart because I put a modern woman in that situation and make her feel how she is reacting to it. This book has come out in Odia and in 2024 will come out in both in Hindi and English. Hopefully I'll get a chance to get it released in Bangalore Literature Festival next year because Bangalore Literature Festival is a place I want to come again and again because early in the morning also I can see the audience here. I would love to...
Can I just ask you one quick question about one of the favorite stories of yours that you mentioned, which is Wild Jasmine? Okay, and I'm just going to give a small prefatory comment before that. There is a school of thought that says, write what you know about. I don't necessarily agree with that. But when it comes to this principle, write what you know about, your particular story on Wild Jasmine is the story of a typical issue in Odisha, which is the displacement of villagers because of industrialization. It happens all over the world. So my question is, when you're sitting off in far off Delhi, in these high offices, what, what provokes you to write about these worlds which you may have once seen or you may have seen as a bureaucrat at some point, but you are now at a distance from? Uh, what draws you to those types of themes that may be quite outside the life? I don't know much about, but it seems as an outsider that your work life and the world that you lead are sort of in different spaces. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, Nilanjan, I would like to give very short answer to this in two parts. One is that, I have grown up in Odisha, though for job and studies I had gone abroad. So there is always in the back of the mind of a writer, kind of a love for a reason one has come from. The way Harish Sumanji has written, and lot many, Shyamala has written, because we can't depart from the roots that we are from and the kind of issues, kind of problems that they face. And sitting wherever, maybe in the heaven also, it does affect you what is going on in your place. Why only in Odisha, in the whole country also. And second part is, I may not sound like a feminist, but being a woman, as a woman otherwise, I have been deprived of many of the, direct experiences. How much I would love to go and sit in a bank of a river in a full moon night all through. How much I would love to be wet in the torrential rain all alone in the midnight on the road. So those things are not there. But I believe that like a blind man touching feeling a rose and then saying that it's so beautiful and fragrant, I do also think from my imagination. And that feminine imagination also does probably helps me, does help me to frame my work, weave a story, weave a novel, or think of a poem around it.
Yeah, thank you. I think you hit the key word of imagination, which can be more truthful than reality at times. So we come now to Linthoi. Linthoi's collection of Manipuri short stories, 2 volumes, I think, which is Wari and the Tales of the Kanglei Throne. And she writes both about, a Manipur that is in the past, that is mythological, and a Manipur that is both, right here and now in your face. So it's both contemporary, historical, mythological, all of that, black magic, superstitions, cultural beliefs. So in New Immortal, a story of an old woman who outlives her, the younger generation, and the young generation is very skeptical because they believe in so-called, science and reason and not in these superstitions. But I think the old woman triumphs. I'm not sure, but maybe that's the way it happens. Amity in Q, the travails of living in a landlocked state. I can personally very quickly understand that because we grew up in Shillong and it was also a landlocked state and road blockades and where you didn't get ration supplies and petrol coming. So it's about 2 sisters, I think, or 2 friends who are struggling to fill up, their Activa scooter with petrol and it's not available because of a blockade. But you quickly follow it up with a story like The Hags of the Mountain, which is about a mythological creature, the Ludrabi, from the legends of Manipur, and then the drug problem among youths in Manipur. So it's a wide swathe. But what I understand from a very preliminary reading is that you try to weld the old and the new, the mythological, the modern, the historical, and the actual. Why do you do this? How do you do this? And how do the two interplay with each other to create something rich?
Yes, for this whole sessions, you have already told in the introductions that we are dealing with short story, which is a theme, which is a genre that is yet to be considered in a serious way. And the kind of idea behind me trying to focus on short story is that as a writer who grew up writing from a very young age, I think that naivety, of a young writers, aspiring writers who was just desperate to tell stories. I think that kind of gives the courage to just tell the stories of the old, the new, whatever is there that we feel the need to tell. And I think all the 8 stories, there are 8 stories in my book, the collection of short story called Wari, which was published in 2019. And all the 8 themes are completely different from one another. But this combinations of all the genres, all the themes, I think comes from the desperateness to show the kind of reality that our society is have, which we feel like it's yet to be heard when we grow up. And then I feel like it evolves into a passion, and now I am also progressing. I feel like as I grew up, I am also progressing as a storyteller, and gives me a wider perspective to grow more. So these are the yes, learning we are going through.
Sure, sure. Thank you. You know, we all come from conflict zones, I'd say. Even Bangalore is a conflict zone. Gaza is a conflict zone. The nature, the intensity is different, but there's always a conflict, and very often the conflict is very severe in this little space. But there are special conflict zones, for example, Manipur, Kashmir, and so on. How do you see the role of a writer in these type of conflict zones, which are like systemic in nature? How do you respond to this as a writer? And what do you think there's a role that writers have, if any, in such zones?
Yes, obviously I think it's really important as a writer, not because as a profession, but people need to understand stories. People are more connected in stories. Just coming here, we just met today. But by listening to all of my panelists, I feel like we're all somehow already connected. So I think this is the most beautiful power of storytelling. We connect through hearts, and that's the kind of connection people need, who come from conflict, who needs to be understood in a much deeper level.
I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely right. I think it was the Dalai Lama who said that we have enough doctors, engineers, scientists. What we need are the musicians, the storytellers, the performers, and those who can bring human hearts together at a point where technology, instead of bringing us closer, is actually driving us further and further apart into a very wide network of very shallow relationships. So I think the written word has great power there. I'm also reminded of this wonderful writer, I hope I'm not making a mistake, Yashwant Chitale, I think. He was Kannadiga, but some of you may know Chitale. He was Kannadiga, but he wrote in Bombay, and he writes about a scene where there is a riot on the street. He was also a short story writer. So there is rioting happening on the street, and the other guy is a poet, and he's reading a poem. And somebody says, his friend says, what is the use of writing poetry when there are riots on the street? And he says, well, if people were reading poetry, then maybe there wouldn't be riots. So if the short form of the story, which is the short story, can be considered as the closest prose equivalent of poetry, I think it has a great value to everybody to offer to its readers. And thank you all once again for bringing this to all of us. Luckily, we are not doing too badly on time. I think we have to end at 11:20, given the 5 minutes extra these guys gave us. It's 11:05 now. I'd like to have at least about 10 minutes of Q&A from the audience. But may I request you, I know it's an impossible ask almost, if you just take one of your favorite pages of one of your favorite stories, and just a page to give us a sense of your voice and what you're writing about. It doesn't have to come with any explanation or anything, so why don't you go? Or whoever's ready. Kalpana, you seem to be ready. So just a page from one of your writings to give us a sample. Yeah, translation, sorry. Use the mic, please.
This is better? Yeah.
Use this.
Thank you.
Hello.
I'm going to read from the last story in the collection, and I know there's not enough time to set it up, but the name of the story in Kashmiri is Hurl. which is translated here as to rage or to endure, which has no meaning to the original word. Hurl means to accustomize yourself, to get used to something, to do something out of habit, but it's never a good thing. It's usually something you're forced to do or forced to accept. So to rage or to endure is at that intersection after migration of 89-90, when the narrator sort of is neither resigned to his new life nor accepting it, but sort of capitulating to what his circumstances are. Excuse me. That year, too, Death made garlands of dried gourd and aubergine to welcome Shinbud. Shinbud is old snowman, or to guard herself against him. That year, too, it snowed heavily. The snow danced as it fell from the sky, but as soon as it touched the ground, it went into a frenzy. Or perhaps a gust of wind came in from somewhere and struck the soft flakes descending from the sky, turning them into ice, freezing them just as they hit the ground. The soft heaps of cotton turned to frost, and the bales of white cloth turned into crystals. Neither Death nor I were accustomed to this. Death is mother. An icy wind blew that pierced the flesh and bones and froze the warm blood that ran through people's veins before they even realized what had hit them. They could have grasped it only if they had been used to it. When I saw this cruel face of Shinubud and was confronted by the icy winds, I let out a scream, and Death screamed even louder. But none of our neighbors heard us. Perhaps even our screams froze before they could reach their ears. If you'll just excuse me one more sentence, please. Is there anyone around? Death yelled again, but just like before, no one came to help us. She sighed. So even here, there's no one we can call our own. This is what Death gleamed from my ramblings.
Thank you so much. But again, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to have to reduce this to just a passage. And by the way, if you feel that it is a meaningless thing and it doesn't really represent your work in any way, and it's not evocative enough, feel free to decline. But if there's a nice little passage you'd like to read out, all yours.
I would like to read the first paragraph from my new book, Wild Kati, which is a fantasy fiction based on Manipur mythology and folklore. On the night of Lamta Thangja, the first Saturday on the month of Lamta, the most ominous day, Fenmei was struggling to deliver her 9th child. The wet nurse, Mayoknabi, who came to help with the delivery, told her that this child would be no ordinary one and that she must patiently endure the pain. But Fenmei screamed, "I care no more." "Oh, just take it out. I don't care. I want this to end soon. I better not die giving birth to babies who wouldn't even live longer than a week." Thank you.
Anushka, you want to? Just a passage.
I'll read from Circus. My great-grandmother could dislocate her left eyeball from its socket. She was part of a traveling circus show for a week, but she fell in love with my great-grandfather, who worked at a pharmacy in South Bombay. She claimed she had the power of the vision, though this was not part of her circus act. The vision is the protagonist of numerous family stories. In one story, women bring my great-grandmother offerings of food and drink, and in return she informs them who is sleeping with whose husband. It is a running joke that women in my family have the vision, but are blind to the philandering of their own spouse. My great-grandmother died in 1979, and I was born the same year. I never met her. On my 13th birthday, my mother gave me an eyeball preserved in a glass jar. The iris is grey, like clouds announcing a thunderstorm. I have kept it all these years. I also inherited her vision. It tells me I will meet my true love when I join the Kohinoor circus. I wonder whether Heron will come to see me perform. My act will be called Daring Draupadi. My real name is Sita.
Thank you. I think that was a perfect example of a little that says a lot. You want the working mic? A very short passage, please. Yeah. Working? Okay.
Maybe it would not make much sense. As Nilanjan said, this story is Wild Jasmine titled. This is regarding rehabilitation in a tribal, portion of Odisha. And there, the Raina is the protagonist girl. She's not a tribal. She's an Anganwadi worker who doesn't want all this to happen. Her brother is an activist, and there is a middleman, that is Ratan. So I'm just reading a passage. It was he, that contractor Babu and his friends. Rina's tone was calm and clear. She fixed her eyes on Tuku's face. She did not blink even once while she said this, although tears ran down her eyes. Where are they? In his house. Rina shifted her gaze towards Tuku's friends standing behind him. Without uttering a word, Tuku turned and stormed out of his room. His friends followed him, moving with the speed of lightning. They reached the other end of the veranda, and the clash of metal on metal was heard. Rina tried to see. There were knives and other weapons in their hands that glittered in the dim light. Tuku and his 6 friends leaped away like wild animals and melted in the darkness in an instant. Rina stood still at the threshold, holding the door in both hands, and kept looking into the darkness. Tears trickled down her eyes. That is how it goes. Thank you.
Okay, a very quick passage from Shyamala, and then we'll open up to Q&A.
Yeah. This is also translated stories. I am writing in Telugu. Because of translators and because of publishers, I am here. This is a title story. Father may be an elephant, mother only a small basket. But I selected my pleasure because no time for pain. But I like pains because I need to battle. For battle, pains gives strength. So, all stories having pains and pleasure. In that, I love my childhood. Every Dalit.
Just
yeah.
get on with the story. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All the children gathered on the bounds outside the village as the sun broke briefly through the rain clouds. It was just before dusk. The droplets on the grass glistened in the sunlight. The boys played Chedugudu in one corner, and the girls played hide and seek, running to catch each other. The younger boys always played with the girls. We flipped a coin, heads or tails. And today it was Bainla Ramulu turned to the catchers. We hide behind the bushes between large sleepy rocks and under the mountain high bounds. We were lost in our game, and nothing in the world could distract us. We had not played like this in all the day. It had been raining. We were desperate not to let a moment go to waste. The newly washed sun pierced again through the dark clouds. A rainbow blossomed. It was perfect. We counted from one side and we counted from the other side, trying to find all the 7 colors. Though she counted many times, Potbelly Nursi could only find 6. When I found all 7, I jumped with joy and again until from a distance I heard one of Pandagala Sayanna's song being sung. It was Talari Antanna on the bound of the village tank. He was mounted on his buffalo, a long wily stick in his hand and singing a Kinnera song.
Shyamala, I think
Yes.
we'll have to leave it at that.